Well, welcome. My name is Casie Merrifield, and this is Eddie Holland, and he'll tell you a little bit more about his role. I work with Connection Worldwide. I'm a co-founder and partner of a leadership development company where we help build leaders worth following. We really do think that secure, confident, humble leaders will get a little bit further in the marketplace than those who try to just wield power and authority and move in that direction. One of my greatest desires as a leadership coach and development specialist is that I really get to share a little bit of my heart for transformation. We've been talking a lot about that in this whole conference. And when I think about the content of our breakout today, what it really means to do marriage and business and what oneness is all about, I will just be the first to tell you, I have not been married that long, only 9 years. My husband and I met when we were 37 years old. I had just started a PhD program. He was my break during all of my seminars, and then when we got married, he was my greatest distraction for getting my dissertation completed. But my dissertation actually is at the heart of what I think the church should be all about, and it's how do we grow up disciples that look like Jesus, and then how in the church, when we start getting off from that call as the people of God, how do we love one another back to really just that Christ-likeness? And so this topic is really dear to my heart. When my husband and I did premarital counseling through my church in Dallas, Texas, we went through a lot of content that was very, very practical, but at the heart of it was just this idea of oneness. And if you look in Ephesians, when Paul is talking to the Ephesians 5:31 and 32, 31 really is just a reference back to Genesis 2:24. But Paul is telling the Ephesians here, he said, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This mystery is profound, but I am talking about Christ and the church." And so at the end of the day, the reason this topic is so important for husbands and wives in business is that we are a testimony to the watching world about Christ and his bride, the church. We are the church. And so if we can live in this place of oneness, when life is hard and personalities are different and we struggle to communicate vision and mission and values and all of these things, at the end of the day, if we will work towards oneness in our marriage, and as we live and work and breathe, God will honor that, and we will be a testimony to the watching world. So we talk a lot about in business mission, vision, values. How do you win? What is your strategy? How do you get where you're going? Well, the same is true in marriage. You've got to begin with the end of mind. You guys have heard this, but I wrote this tool for us today because I think this just really captures the essence of how we get down here to role clarity, and just this idea of how do I know whether I'm a spouse inside the business or a spouse outside of the business? How do I know what my role is if we share this life together, but business, we all have different responsibilities going on in it. So planning for oneness, I just started with that at the top. If we want to plan for oneness, we have to really think in terms of what are our family values? What legacy do you want to leave? How do you get to that legacy? It's going to inform every business decision you make. Are we really tracking in the right direction? And then what values will inform your life and your business ventures? Now, what's interesting about this is when we went through our merge premarital counseling, we talked about finances and intimacy. We talked about so many different things. Not once was there a topic on what happens in business. And so I'm going to go back to my leaders who wrote this incredible material and go, you need to add this. And the reason why is because many of us play different roles within a family business. And as a spouse, it came up when in our marriage, my husband has been in business since he was little. His dad was a girls basketball coach, and then after he won the state championship, he said, I'm going to open up a furniture business. And so my husband was brought up into this business, working at the store as a kid, and then after college, he and his brother started taking it over. I've got a marketing degree, I've got a marriage and family counseling degree, and as I've already told you, I was working on a PhD in leadership when I moved from Dallas, Texas to Elk City, Oklahoma. So millions of people till about 12,000. So I get to the family business, and they were without a bookkeeper. They were like, we need you to step in. Can you help us? So I get into just this idea of family business the Merrifield way, and I get there, and I'm like, oh, wow, they just do things so differently than I do, right? Family of origin, right? Some of the content of marriage struggle is that your family does it different than their family. Can I get a raised hand if your family does? Okay, yeah, we're all there. And the reality is what happened, this all came up actually a few months ago. I walk into our office supply store, which we also sell toys, that's fun. And my niece with her new baby is there, and she said, hey, did you know my dad, my husband's brother, did you know my dad and Scott want to buy a laundromat? I was like, what? A laundromat? What even in the world? So I go home, and I'm like, honey, are we buying a laundromat? And he was like, oh, well, we decided not to. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. You've already thought you would and decided not to, and I have not even been invited into this conversation? And he said, I mean, well, we're not buying it. And I was like, well, okay, so that's okay. But I realize for 39 years, you made business decisions on your own. And now that we've been married almost 9 years at the time, I think I should be a part of these discussions. He's not here he is here today in another session. I told him I was going to tell this story, and I asked permission. But the reality is, it finally got us talking about something we had not discussed. How are we going to make decisions together about business and otherwise if we're not really even communicating those things? And so back to it. What is your mission and your vision? And then what are the values that inform everything in your life? Now, we talk about this often in business, but we don't always talk about how we want our families to be ruled by the same mission and vision. And do you have a vision statement for your family? Do you have a mission? And what are the values your family is going to make decisions by? Now, what's interesting is once you kind of get that in your head and in your heart and you start operating in that, trust is so important in any relationship, a partnership, and in a marriage. But we often start a breakdown of trust when, as couples, we have to deal with character and competency, right? And character, generally we married the person in our world because we believed in their character. But sometimes that character can be compromised when intent and integrity are not followed through in a way where we're communicating with each other. What is the intent, and how are we going to back up that intent with what we're doing as a family? The next thing that's important is competency, right? Capability and results. I'm a gifted business person, but my husband and I have never done business together. So when does he engage with me about what's going on with Merrifield? He also is a cattleman, so he has cows, right? I went out and took pictures of cows when we first got married, and people thought I lived on a farm, and I don't. We live in town. But the reality is I cannot tell him one thing about buying and selling cattle. No competency, right? So there's no way I'm going to be able to engage in that. But when it comes to us making decisions, competency matters, because what happens if he has an idea, and many of you are married to or are the dreamers in the family, right? Let's just keep building, and serial entrepreneurs and all of that kind of thing. But how often have you come to your spouse and you're like, I have this great idea, and you're hearing this, and your ideas, we always have ideas, right? The ideas never stop. But do they ever land? Right? Some ideas never land, and some actually really go the full process, and that's why you're in the fishery business, right? Karen. And so the reality is we've got character and competency, and sometimes we misstep with our spouses because we are not doing the hard conversation of communication, expectations, self-awareness, what it's really like to be on the other side of us in these important conversations, and our own personal development, or that sanctification process that we've got to continue to think about how we look more like Jesus with our spouses and not just our employees. So what does this really look like? Because once we do this over and over and over and over, it's how we really decide where our time, talent, and treasure go. Because you start making these decisions and you start deciding, is our family, do we have the capacity? Am I going to ever see my spouse again? Am I ever going to see my grandkids again? If we keep going in this direction, are we really going to have a quality of life at this season or this season or this season that's really important for us? And so when you really think about that, it really begins with the end in mind. But then you have to start thinking, are we continuing to build this connection of trust with one another through appropriate communication, expectations, self-awareness, and our own personal growth to get to that place where we finally go, okay, what's my role in this season, in this company, and with my spouse as we make business decisions? Now, the beautiful thing about this is kind of a framework. I'm going to maybe share some other things with you in a few minutes, but Eddie Holland, who is with Ronald Blue Trust, he wants to share with you what this looks like when he starts getting with his people and the clients that he works with from the day-to-day. Eddie?
Thank you, Casie. As Casie said, my name is Eddie Holland. I'm one of the advisors in the Greenville, South Carolina office of Ronald Blue Trust. My wife and I have been married 18 years, have two beautiful girls, 13 and 10. A little bit of extra estrogen flowing through the Holland house right now, so trying to navigate life in a different season. But as Casie said, we have the privilege of working clients through this process. Just out of curiosity, with a show of hands, how many of you represent a business where both spouses are actively involved in the business? Okay, and then by a show of hands, how many where the spouse has no involvement whatsoever? Okay, that's fairly common, and that's something that we help clients navigate. Now, you can appreciate and understand that the challenges are different, right? There's challenges with an active spouse and a spouse that's not as active. But I think as Casie said, the goal is to really define role and provide clarity. We have a saying in our office that clarity is kindness. What that means is you're displaying kindness to someone when you're very clear on what your expectations are of that person. And that doesn't necessarily just translate to marriage. That can translate in business, an employer, an employee, obviously a spouse, a parent relationship. But what we try to do is we try to determine and help clients think through, okay, what's the mission, vision, and values of the business? How involved do you want your spouse to be in that? And then when we start talking about character and competency, how much involvement does the spouse want to have? Now, here's the reality. The reality is that most of you in here are going to have your spouse longer than you're going to have your business. You're going to transition out of ownership and management of the business, and hopefully, Lord willing, you still have a spouse that's a big part of your life. So if you've devoted your energy and effort and time and focus on the business and neglected your marriage, then when you get to the precipice of that next journey or that next stage in life, then you may be staring into the face of a spouse that you don't know very well, and it may cause you to say, you know what, I just want to continue to working because I know work, but I don't know this next transition, this next stage. So the goal is exactly what Casie said. We want oneness so that you're excited and there's a lot of momentum when you enter that next stage of life. Now, I will tell you, as I mentioned before, that our goal is for you to finish well. In finishing well, we're all very familiar with that Bible verse that says, what good is it for a man to gain the world but lose his soul? I would paraphrase that a little bit and say, what good is it for a man or a woman to build a successful business but lose his family? Whether that's the children, whether that's the marriage. And so we're very intentional about making sure that we methodically think through process with the ultimate end in mind, as Casie said. But that end is really determined by the couple. So we try to bring even a spouse that's not actively involved in the business into the conversations about what do you hope this business is. It reminds me of of conversation my wife had with me, and she said, look, I want more of you and not more money. That's what I want. I want more of you. And so we've got to define early in my career, I was working for a CPA firm and 70 or 80 hours a week, and she said, this is just not what I'd expected in marriage. And so those conversations are necessary. Let's assume you're further down the line. You've been operating a business for 20, 30, or 40 years. What type of conversations does that entail? Well, I think it really depends on what type of engagement you have. For the spouse that's involved in the business, there's some complexities and challenges you have to work through, and vice versa for those that aren't involved in the business. It reminds me of a story. There was a husband and wife. Husband was 100% owner of the business. Wife was actively involved in the business. One of the sons was involved in the business. The father was directly supervising the son, so he was technically the boss of his son. And his son was really not fulfilling his obligations and responsibilities to the father's standard. So the father sat down with his wife, who was involved in the business, and he said, Johnny's just not doing things the way I'd expect him to do it. He's not carrying on the family name to the standard that I've set. And the wife said, well, I don't necessarily see it that way. I don't agree with what you're saying. And she said, really, I feel like he's doing the best of anybody in the company. And he said, yeah, but he's held to a higher standard. And the wife said, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that he should be held to the same standard we hold all our employees to. The husband said, no, he's looked at differently. Everybody in our company knows that he's our son, so he has to hold himself to a higher standard. The wife said, I just don't agree with that, but you know what? Let's just agree to disagree. Well, the father said, as his boss, I need to hold him accountable, and I need to have a conversation with him. So the wife says, well, just keep in mind that he's your son also. You're not just the boss, but you're the father. And he said, okay. So he goes out and has a conversation with his son. His son's a little surprised by the conversation, but he receives it well, receives a constructive criticism. Father leaves the meeting feeling very good about himself, goes home, has dinner, gets ready for bed, ready to share, the story and kind of the conversation with his wife. His wife's already in bed a few minutes early before he gets in bed. So he rolls into bed, wants to snuggle up and have some cuddle time with his wife. She gives him the cold shoulder, and she says, just so you're aware, I don't sleep with my son's boss. I sleep with his father. And so the concept is, look, like you've got to kind of know what the role is as the son and as the father, but also as the boss. And so as you start talking about the competency of your kids, understand what role you want your spouse to play if he or she's not involved in the business or if he or she is involved in the business. One of the main things that we do is walk clients through this framework, which I think Casie did a great job of illustrating here, understanding with the goal of role clarity. That's really what we want, is we want to know what expectations you have of your spouse. And here's another thing that we help clients understand. I was talking with a gentleman last night. He's kind of in a glide path to transitioning his business. He doesn't have any children that want to take over. That's another dynamic. If you have children in the business, a lot of complexity there regarding transition from Gen 1 to Gen 2 or Gen 2 to Gen 3. But in this case, this gentleman's looking to transition out, and he has no children or family to pass it to. So in his mind, he's thinking, okay, well, this is going to be the glide path. His wife, and I can't tell you how many times we've met with couples where the wife, in this case, has an expectation that husband's going to transition sooner rather than later, and it's going to be a cold turkey stop at some point. And what that means is we're going to travel more, we're going to enjoy activities together. This is how we anticipate spending our money. We've deprived ourselves for a while, so we want to have some excess margin built in. We want to have this lake house or this beach house. We want to do the things that we've been neglecting for 30 or 40 years. Well, if you've not had that conversation with your spouse, and I can't tell you how many times I've sat across the table from clients, I've asked the husband and wife the same question, and I get competing answers. Well, it's clear that that conversation hasn't been really fleshed out in a lot of detail. So part of our job is not necessarily just a financial advisor, but it's a marriage counselor. It's understanding the complexity, the issues, trying to navigate around them with the ultimate goal of having clarity. Because as we said, clarity is kindness, not just to your employees, but also to your spouse. Now, there are different personalities. My guess is that most everybody in here that's married probably has a spouse that has a different personality than you. Their makeup is different. God has wired them in a unique way to support you, to encourage you, but also to hold you accountable. Marriage is really a lesson in edification, right? It is sanctification and edification. So what Casey's going to talk about next is really the different types of personalities, how you can understand those different types of personalities, how you can appreciate those different types of personalities, but also how you can really understand how you can work together to create synergy and really momentum going forward.
Great. Thank you, Eddie. How many of you are Enneagram experts in here? Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Jungian typology? You love the Enneagram?
She's an expert.
Yes. So this is an area where we love to play, and this is what I want to say. This is everything from expectations, self-awareness, personal growth, and communication. You have all been given a God-given design, right? And then you have also walked in this space where you have been nurtured based on your upbringing, your oughts and shoulds, the conversations that the generation you were brought up in, the people you've been around. And the reality is the Jungian typology, if you do the 16 personalities with Myers-Briggs, a good friend of ours who is this personality guru, he made it very simple. He said, we are going to discuss those personalities from a leadership standpoint and leadership voice. So what is it like to be on the other side of you? How to communicate effectively with everyone you love and lead? And it's the 5 voices. So if you look at this, these are not Wi-Fi signals right here. These are actually volume scale. And so it's the amount of what I would say, how much are you actually heard in the midst of conversation? I will tell you this. We have access to all 5 of the voices, but we don't actually understand many of them. And really, there's 1 or 2 that are very foundational, 1 that we kind of lean into, and then 1 that we're kind of like, I just don't get those people. I mean, I know it's out there, but they frustrate me. I tell my friends all the time, I'm going to need to know your leadership voice if we're going to be friends, because when I'm frustrated with you, I'm going to need to know why, right? Most of our issues in any kind of relationship are not really a matter of character or otherwise. It's a matter of we just don't understand people who are different than us. Why don't they think like we do or communicate like we do? So just to give you a real quick overview of these 5 voices, 43% of the population is nurturer. These are probably the lowest on the volume scale. It's not that they don't talk, but sometimes they don't. But sometimes they just don't feel like they have a voice at the table, and everybody else is so much louder. They will let everybody else talk before they will talk. 43% of the population is nurturer. Then you look over here at the creatives, and 9% of the population are creatives. These are people who are really outside of the box thinkers, and so they do try to talk, but people just don't often understand them because some of their ideas are so far in the future that they don't really understand them. Whereas the nurturers are very much champions of relational harmony, people, values. The creative is very much innovation, kind of the red warning, flag warning, like a hurricane, right? Like, what flag? Don't go out in the ocean. These are the people who can look so far in the future intuitively that they go, if we don't go in this direction, the company's going to die. Or if we don't quit doing this, we are going to sabotage all of our innovation from early on. So they just have this idea of what needs to change. But some people are opposed to change, right? Why do we have to change things? And nurturers are very much present-oriented people. Creatives are very future-oriented people. You get to the guardians, and guardians, these people are so important in a company because they, or in any kind of space where you have to make decisions, because these are champions of due diligence, systems, processes, whereas intuitive people and the very future-oriented people are ready to just fly this plane before it's built. Every nurturer and guardian's going, whoa, 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 slow your roll. Like, let's back up here. Unless this plane is built right, we're going to crash and burn. So due diligence, processes, systems, these are the people who help things get really excellent and going in the right direction. Connectors are relational network people, collaboration, effective communication. These are the people who really are always having multiple ideas about how do we build this? How do we build this? I've got this great idea. But they also have lots of resources. They know lots of people. You can enter a conversation with them before the conversation's over. If you have mentioned any sort of need in that conversation before the conversation's over, they already have somebody that can help you because they know everybody and they know lots of things. So they're continually giving you resources. These are also very future-oriented people. So whereas guardians and nurture are very pragmatic and present-oriented, these connectors are very much future-oriented. Pioneers. Pioneers are 7% of the population, but they're overrepresented at the top of leadership in the American culture, right? Because these are the people who are very military strategic people. They know how to align peoples and systems to get people going in the right direction. And so they're very visionary. They're very results focused. Get it done, get it done. We've got to win. Winning is a massive driver for the pioneer. And so these are the people who are like really a lot of times focused on the bottom line. But you've got people over here who might be a little bit more focused on the relational aspect of it, and it causes division in companies. I will say this sometimes can cause division in a marriage, right? This idea of like, let's do, and the other spouse is like, but wait, I don't think we have margin for that, the systems and the processes that go into that when they're not detailed people. And so there's that. Think about families, and I love that Eddie brought this. This is more than oneness in a marriage. This is how do you unify a family, right? You're going to pass a company on to another son or daughter, but what if they do it differently than you? And so the important thing is not how different is your voice, but how mature are you in that voice so that you're not burning bridges and you're valuing every voice around the table. And are you valuing the voice of the wife or the husband? A couple of quick things that help put this in a little bit of context, right? So if you're communicating vision, do you know everybody who has an idea and you're like, oh, this is so exciting, and then some people are like, I'm not really sure I can get on board with that yet, right? Do you know these people, the more nurture or guardian types, they really struggle. They're late adopters. They're not ready for that new idea yet. They just want to make the old idea really great because they don't feel like that's really even been fine-tuned yet, right? Systems, processes, all of those things. Here's another way this kind of fleshes itself out. I was talking to a couple, or I was actually talking to a client yesterday during one of the breaks, and she is a creative. She's a creative connector, so she's very much cares about her people, but she wants to do something, but she struggles to give people the detail they need to really buy in. And sometimes visionaries need to build the bridge for a guardian and nurturer to come with them. The vision may be actually awesome, but because the details to get to that awesome have not been communicated, we struggle. My husband and I, we are both nurturers. He's a nurturer creative, and I'm a nurturer connector. But he has also lived in a culture where there's not been a lot of change. So sometimes it feels like I am thinking outside of the box when I'm really not. But I have to paint the bridge for him if we're talking about those details. The one final tool I want to share with you, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Eddie to just look at how this looks like inside the clients he works with, is this idea of provisional plan promise. Remember when I told you that sometimes spouses lose credibility with their own spouse? It's because a lot of times their ideas never really happen, but they talk about them as if they're the most important thing going on. That if you're a sensory, pragmatic, nurturer, guardian, and you're thinking about all the details that have to happen to achieve something, you will start planning and putting together, and then the next day the spouse says, oh, I mean, that was just an idea. I'm not really going to do that, right? But you've already moved your family. You've already reorganized the budget. You've already thought about where your kids are going to go to school because we're doing something off the wall that we never thought we were going to do, but it never really is important. So if you can learn to engage with this conversation with your spouse, hey, is this provisional? Because provisional says this is just an idea I'm thinking about. I think it's a great idea. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but it's an idea that keeps rolling around in my mind. Here's what happens. When that provisional idea goes, I really think I want to camp out on this. I think we need to start thinking about how we're going to invest our time and our talent and our treasure in this. And so I'm probably going to need to engage a little bit more with those sensory details to find out if this is really something that's going to be a steward of what God's calling us to. Because if we start really planning it out, it's not a necessary thing, but it needs to know, is this a profitable stewardship place in our family? But then when it's a promise, you're going to put it on the calendar. This is when we want to start. Then you know you're all in. So provisional, plan, promise. And this is where, if you're the more sensory, pragmatic type, when your dreamer spouse starts going, I have this great idea, instead of that internal anxiety that generally creeps up with, like, is this really going to happen, and how much am I going to have to do to get it there? You need to ask the question, is this something provisional, or do we really need to start asking the detailed questions here? If you're the dreamer, go ahead and tell your spouse, this is just provisional, but I want us to think about it. Because if you've got sensory kids who you're like, hey, let's go to Disney World sometime. How many times have your kids go, you told us we were going to Disney World. When are we going to Disney World, right? Well, I was just thinking it out loud. Not to your guardian or nurture child. They've got it on the calendar. They're ready to go. So you lose credibility if your ideas are actually never going to land. So as I think about that, those are just some tools for you to think about this process.
I'm actually going to go back because I'm going to use some of that.
Okay, go right ahead. Eddie's up.
So let me just make a point here. My wife and I, I'm a fixer in our marriage. She's not. So when we engage in conversation, I've learned very early on to ask her, is this a problem you want me to fix, or is this just a problem that you want me to listen to? And I think that can translate to marriage, right? Because there's times when she wants to just talk through something that she has no vision or goal of fixing, which quite frankly drives me nuts. Like, why are we wasting breath talking about something that we can't fix? But what do I do when I treat her that way? I chip away at this bridge, right? Like, this is the beautiful diagram of understanding. We're trying to build a bridge, and there's a chasm here, right? There's a gap, and most of the time in marriage there is, and sometimes that can be a communication gap, sometimes it can be an expectation gap. But the sooner we recognize that gap, the sooner we appreciate the reasons that God has put us together and equipped us in different ways to try to steward our business, our family, our finances, whatever it may be. I think it's really wonderful to try to understand this, but also in a way lean into that and appreciate the tension, because a lot of times tension can create momentum, which can create additional results, which is really what we try to do with clients. One of the things that we help clients understand, what is your finish line? How much do you need? How much is enough? And then how much is too much? And that may not be a framework that most of you operate under, but how much is too much for yourself? How much is too much for your children? The gentleman I was talking about yesterday, let's say he sells his business. He doesn't want to hand over everything to his one and only son. So he may say, hey, we're going to give some to charity. Well, if there's an expectation gap between what you intend and what your spouse or your child anticipates, there's what we call a coping gap. And that coping gap is really illustrated here. There's a gap between reality and expectation, and we want to really lean into that. So I think Casey's done a great job of illustrating this. You can tell which one of us is more of the artistic, which one is more of the more kind of spreadsheet, linear thinker. I don't know whatever side of the brain that is, but I did not get any of that. So thankfully, Casie really captured the essence of what we do from a marriage standpoint, from a business standpoint, and really from a way that honors God. So let me just mention one thing, and then I'll pass it to her to close. We actually have a framework. We call it a spouse's guide to the family business, and this was created, and I stole this from the illustrious Clint Park, who's back in the back. Clint used to be a Ron Blue advisor on the business consulting side. He left us to go with Sovereign's Capital, which we were fully in support of, but a little sad as well. But while Clint was an employee of RBT, he created this spouse's guide to business, and it's not prescriptive, and it's certainly not exhaustive, but it's a framework that we use to think through decisions and conversations for spouses that are in the business and spouses that are not in the business. So I have some copies up here. If you'd like to grab one on your way out, if you want to talk about it afterwards, I'm happy to talk through that. Clint's in the back as well. He's happy to talk through that with you. So let me pass it to Casie to close.
Yeah, just as we close, the goal is oneness, right? Here's the other reality that we all live in. We're selfish. We just want people to come to our side, think the way we think, do it the way we do it. And the reality is we have to continually grow up in our God-given design to know ourselves and lead ourselves, and then know our spouses to lead our spouses, know our kids to lead our kids, and ultimately glorify the Lord. And so there is a gap in most conversations between us and them. And the more we can close this gap and really focus on healthy communication, healthy expectations, I'll just say even stated expectations. Sometimes we don't even state them, right? My husband's an introvert. He tells me all the time, I told you that. I was like, no, I think you told me that. I think you thought it 400 times in your mind, but it never came out of your mouth, right? And he hears everything I say, and so it gets like a broken record. So then he didn't hear it because he's tuned me out, right? I'm an extrovert. He's an introvert. So just knowing that wiring, and part of what we do at Connection is we help you grow up in your leadership tendencies so that you lead and you don't self-sabotage. I think we unknowingly self-sabotage our leadership. Where our competency is high, our leading people is often not as high as we want it to be. So we get to help come in and create a culture where we're helping you grow up in that, leading others who are differently than you. It has been our privilege. We're going to be here for a few minutes at the end of this. If you need anything, we would love to talk to you, but you're free to go. And then at the next session starts, I think, at 11:20. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you all.